started. SJ kindly invited me some time ago, and also George Fibby invited me, so it's a pleasure to be here. My topic today focuses on one that is especially timely, the Affordable Care Act. Indeed, when we booked this several months ago, none of us quite knew what would be going on. And now we have an idea what's going on, and I'm here to explain to you what will happen. My goal here today is to walk you through the history of Obamacare in 45 minutes. I can do it, I promise. So our story actually begins with my new book, as kindly mentioned, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. Buy a copy, I'll sign it for you. But our story truly begins long before Barack Obama ever came to office, but with this picture. Some of you may remember this one. See, when I give this talk to students, they have no idea what this picture means, right? Does everyone know what this picture means? I'm sorry, the Rice students probably weren't even alive yet. But indeed, in the early 1990s, in Bill Clinton's first term, he asked First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton to chair a task force, as they called it. And that gave rise to this lovely picture, and Hillary Care, okay? Now, what was Hillary Care? A national form of health care that the government proposed that Americans a right to health insurance. It didn't do very well, and for those of you in the room who are not undergraduates at Rice, you'll also remember these commercials, right? These were the Harry and Louise commercials that were aired. This one right here, so I can reach my thing. Good. These were the Harry and Louise ads that aired in the early 1990s. And the premise of these commercials were fairly simple. You had a ma and pa sitting at a table, reading this voluminous healthcare plan and saying, you know what, I like my health insurance. I like my doctor. I don't want the government getting between me and my doctor. And these commercials were effective because, indeed, to this day, that's how most Americans think about it. They don't want the government getting between them and their. These ads almost single-handedly killed Hillary Care. The popularity of the policy plummeted for a period of time. And these ads taught a very important promise. If you want to reform health insurance, you have to tell people, don't worry, you can keep what you have. There's a basic economic principle, right? It can be affordable, it can be accessible. Can't be all three, I'll give you two of them. Why? If it's cheap, it's not going to be very good. If it's accessible to everyone, it won't be very comprehensive. And it's not going to be cheap. These are very, very basic principles. Now, when the Affordable Care Act was being sold, there was a con job that went on. And it's a promise that all of you have heard more times than you can count, right? If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. This wasn't just a lie. It was a lie, don't get me wrong, right? But it was a pernicious lie in that it made the American people think that you could actually give health insurance to 20 million people without changing what you already have. And this is frankly impossible. Even beyond the millions of people who lost their policies, their premiums, deductibles, smaller coverage networks, and a host of other costs that simply are not reflected when you say, oh, 20 million people have gained coverage. But no matter. In 2009, the ACA was on a manifest collision with destiny. They were going to pass this thing. Why? Necessarily popular. 60 votes in the Senate. After the Al Franken election and Ted Stevens and go down the list, they got to 60 one way or another. And with this, on December 24th, 2009, the Senate voted on an early version of the bill known as the Affordable Care Act. The bill is nearly 3,000 pages. Did anyone read it? Of course not. In fact, Max Baucus, the Montana senator who chaired the Finance Committee, admitted that he doesn't read bills. He pays people to do that for him. So any of my friends from Rice, if you're ever interns in the government, maybe one day you'll read a bill, the person actually voting on it. That's how things work nowadays. But then something crazy happened. The bill that was passed in the Senate on December 24th, 2009 was a draft. It was never meant to be the final version. The plan was, let's pass the version in the Senate, House, and then you can go back and forth and modify it and make changes as government does. But that back and forth conferencing process simply never happened. Why? That summer, Senator Ted Kennedy, the liberal lion, had died. And a special election was held in January to fill the seat in Massachusetts. Who won? Scott Brown, a Republican. Brown ran on the promise of being the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. And indeed he did. He was the 41st vote in the Senate that they could now filibuster and block the ACA. That left the Democrats in Congress in a very tough position. Speaker Pelosi realized that if she made any significant changes to the bill and sent it back to the Senate, it would be filibustered. At that point, the Republicans could do very little because the Democrats decided to do something called budget reconciliation, which is something you may have heard of. This is a way where both branches, both the House and Senate, can modify budgetary effects without a filibuster. So long as some changes affect the budget, it can be done without a filibuster. That's exactly what happened. So even though the Senate never actually voted in the proper way with the filibuster, they managed to pass the bill. And the final vote in the House, and this is a number that I show very often, was that 219 Democrats voted for Obamacare and 0 Republicans voted for the law. And I like just for a second, because I think it illustrates in large measure how we got to where we are today. The opposition, the steadfast opposition to this law that we've seen from Republicans, I think stemmed in large part from the fact that it was passed on a straight party line vote without even a single Republican supporting it. If you look at the major laws passed in the 20th century, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, the Civil Rights Act, these are all laws passed with bipartisan support. As a result, they're fairly enduring. In contrast, the ACA was not. This was a rushed party line vote that was meant to transform 20% of the American economy. Only now crept narrowly above a 50% popularity rating. This is not how you change transformationally. No matter, the president signed it, cheerful in the Oval Office. You can see he's signing his 23 pens, in fact. He uses 1 pen for each part of his signature. He hands them out as trinkets. But as the president signed it, he no doubt thought, the battle over Obamacare is over. I can move on and we can implement this amazing law. Not so fast. Within 7 minutes of the ACA being signed, the first constitutional challenge to the law was put into effect. Florida, Virginia, Texas, and a number of states sued the federal government, claiming that the law was unconstitutional. This was a subject of my first book, buy a copy, called Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. And the basis of this challenge can be summarized with a single vegetable, broccoli. Can the government make you buy broccoli? Government make you buy health insurance? Does the federal government have to compel you to engage in a commercial transaction you do not want to engage in? This wound its way all the way to the Supreme Court. And a decision that breaks my heart every single time I teach it without fail, save the Affordable Care Act. Chief Justice Roberts said, no, Congress cannot make you buy insurance, but they can tax you for going uninsured. What's the difference? I'm still trying to figure it out. The ACA was saved, and the process fell back to politics. So for a period, we had Mitt Romney running on the platform to repeal and replace Obamacare. Unfortunately, Mitt Romney was quite possibly the worst candidate imaginable for this topic. Why? Because as governor of Massachusetts, he invented Obamacare, right? He created Romneycare, which relied on very similar market principles to expand health insurance to people in Massachusetts. During the debate, President Obama referred to Governor Romney as the godfather of Obamacare. The godfather. You know what? He was right. He was. No matter. Romney lost, Obama won, and President Obama took his second term in office. The Chief Justice was like, yeah, thanks a lot, buddy. Right, so the Chief Justice swore him in yet again. But this really began the next phase in the discussion of the Affordable Care Act, which touches on a lot of important topics, one of which is religious liberty, or as I call it, conscience and contraception. You may recall during the debate of the ACA, a number of pro-life Democrats, Bart Stupak, among others, were opposed to the law because it would require the funding for abortion. The president mollified them and basically bought up their votes by signing an executive order, a worthless one at that, which said that the law would not fund abortions. As we'll see, this executive order didn't quite pan out. Why? As the law was being debated, Senator Mikulski of Maryland introduced what's called the Women's Health Amendment. Okay, what is the Women's Health Amendment? It said, for women, they can't be charged extra for preventive care. What's preventive care mean? Well, Congress didn't decide that question. Instead, they punted it to the Department of Health and Human Services, which punted the question to the Health Resources Service Administration. Never heard of any of these groups. Which in turn punted it to the Institute of Medicine. Never heard of them either, right? Good. So this wasn't Congress that made the decision, but some three-letter organization that no one's ever heard of. And they decided that preventive care means the full range of FDA-approved contraception, including the morning after pill. As a result, as interpreted, the Affordable Care Act required all employers to give their employees the full complement of emergency contraception. This was an actual advertisement, if I can even read this at a Pachyderm club, that was put out in favor of the ACA's mandate. SJ will throw something at me, I have to stop. But it says, got insurance? Let's get physical. OMG, that's, oh my God. OMG, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as his birth control. And the picture says it all. He has his hands in his pocket. She's giving thunder pills. You know it's about to go down. But the funny part about this advertisement, right? If the law says these women now get free access to birth control, someone has to pay for it. Someone like an order of nuns. These are the little sisters of the poor. An order of nuns who were at first put under this birth control mandate. Now, this is going to sound crazy to you. Under the initial version of this regulation, the only groups that were actually exempted were churches and houses of worship. If you were a religious nonprofit, such as the Little Sisters of the Poor, the Obama administration said you are not religious enough to do this. Because your employees are not all of the same faith, and because you treat people, the elderly, who are not all Catholic, you are not sufficiently religious to warrant an exemption. Okay. This did not go well. Even people like Chris Matthews and others said this is going too far. So they issued a new round of regulations that said, okay, nuns, you don't have to pay for the birth control pills. We'll just amend your insurance contract to provide these things through your plan. Just sign this form, sign this little piece of paper. We'll amend your contract, and that way all the people working in your order of nuns will have access to the morning after pill, right? Perfect, right? Makes sense. As you may imagine, the nuns objected, as did another company that many of you probably know well, Hobby Lobby. It's a craft store. It's owned by a fairly religious family, but we'll get back to the religious liberty argument in a minute. This is a Pachyderm club. Let's talk politics for a minute. Perhaps the biggest collision, until this point at least, the biggest collision between the ACA and politics occurred in the summer and fall of 2013. I assumed wrongly that after Mitt Romney's defeat that the repeal effort would simply die down. I was wrong. As we're seeing today, the movement to repeal Obamacare was far from over. Why? Our very own Ted Cruz of Houston lives not too far from here, right? Went on TV in the summer of 2013 saying we need to defund Obamacare now. We need to stop the Affordable Care Act. So here was the plan, right? This was Cruz's strategy. The Affordable Care Act exchange is opened on October 1st. October 1st. The budget expired on September 30th. Okay, so budget finishes September 30th. Obamacare opens October 1st. Perfect, Cruz says. We'll simply defund Obamacare before October 1st and it'll never go into effect. His colleague Mike Lee preached this strategy across the country. Unfortunately, it didn't go quite as planned. There was zero support to defund Obamacare beyond maybe 5 or 10 senators. And as a result, the government yielded a shutdown. Before the shutdown happened, in a memorable scene, Ted Cruz read his kids Green Eggs and Ham from the Senate floor during his 24-hour filibuster. Now, regardless of whether it was a success or not, as a feat of strength, this was remarkable. I don't think I could speak for 24 hours straight. He did it. That's impressive. It didn't yield anything. Actually, it was probably counterproductive, but I'll give him points in terms of the feat of strength. But about a week after Cruz's speech, no budget could be reached, and we had the government shutdown. Perhaps the most visible symptom of the government shutdown was the World War II memorial in D.C. You may recall that they have groups of World War II vets, not many left, but they're around, who fly to D.C. and they see their memorial. You can imagine what would happen if you were a vet who came to D.C. for one day only, and there were barricades put up at the memorial. So what happened? They picked up the barricades and they dumped them across the street at the White House. You can imagine if the shores of Normandy couldn't stop them, neither could some silly barricades. This went on for about 2 weeks, but eventually all good things and bad things must come to an end. How did it come to an end? The debt ceiling crisis. Eventually, as they usually do, the Republicans caved and they gave in to every single demand. Not only did they fully fund the government, they removed the sequestration, and they gave the president everything he wanted. And Obamacare was fully funded. So, no gain. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this process was as the government shut down, the law itself, the ACA, began to unravel. And this took the form of the website, healthcare.gov. You may remember this. This was the amazing website that spent about $2 billion on that you're supposed to be able to sign up for insurance. It didn't quite work. In fact, it was something of a nightmare for people because they weren't able to even access the damn thing. People were waiting on end. And this website was really an existential crisis to the law. If people weren't able to sign up for insurance by a certain point, then they would be hit with a mandate penalty through no fault of their own, and the entire law would probably come apart. So the president called in the nerds, the so-called tech surge, and he promised that by Thanksgiving of 2013, the website would work well enough. And indeed it did. The 5 or 6 engineers from Google and Facebook did what an entire federal bureaucracy couldn't do in 2 years. They built a website. But ultimately, the website was operational. But with one crisis subsiding, another one came to the fore. These were the cancellation notices. I mentioned earlier that the president had promised over and over again that if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. The problem with this, of course, is it wasn't true. And not only was it not true, his own administration was issuing regulations, which made it harder to grandfather your plan. Is this the case? Because the government didn't want you to have your old, cheap, stingy plan. They wanted you to have a new gold-plated Obamacare plan. So millions of Americans received letters like this in the mail saying your policy has been canceled because of the healthcare law. Go buy a new health insurance policy. Despite the Secretary of HHS, Kathleen Sebelius, her best efforts to rationalize it, they lied. They lied. They misled. There's no doubt about it. In fact, PolitiFact gave President Obama the lie of the year. I didn't know that was a category. Apparently they have a thing called lie of the year. And it was a doozy at that. But now people were left with no choice. Their plans were canceled, and they had one choice left but to enroll in Obamacare. So they walked down to the local Obamacare store. I don't know where this store is, but apparently there's an Obamacare store somewhere. We can buy health insurance from the storefront. And eventually, about 8 million people were able to enroll in the health insurance marketplace. Now, a fitting topic, whenever you see these numbers, how many people gained insurance, there's a couple of grains of salt that you must take these with. So one of the crazy things about Obamacare is that people can sign up for coverage, go get expensive treatment, never pay their bills, and the insurance companies can't collect from them. So a significant number of people, maybe about 10%, who sign up for these policies never actually pay for them. So the numbers are actually much lower. The second thing about numbers you have to keep in mind, and this is the Congressional Budget Office that we often hear about, is their forecasts are not very accurate. For example, the government forecasted that there would be 20 million people enrolled in exchanges now. The actual number is closer to 11 million. So the number has been way, way off, and they vastly overestimated how much people would actually want to sign up for health insurance. So take all these numbers with a little sprinkle of salt here and there. Let's move back to religious liberty, right? And let's talk about how the law itself perhaps ran afoul of some grounds. So we have the Hobby Lobby Corporation. This is a small business, began in a garage in Oklahoma City, founded by a husband and wife. And they grew to a I think they're in almost all 50 states. Maybe they're not a couple in the middle, but they're basically about 40 some odd states. Very, very, very successful business. But the remarkable part of the Hobby Lobby Corporation is that it's not publicly traded. Indeed, the company is owned not just by the husband and wife who founded it, but by his family. Right? This may look like an Easter card, but in fact, it's a picture of the board of directors. Right? For everyone who works for the company is related. They're all family members, which is a lovely thing. But as part of having all the members of the family working together, they are basically all the same religion, and they have the same religious beliefs. This isn't like Pepsi or Chevron or some massive publicly traded company trying to have imagine 5,000 Pepsi shareholders voting on what their health insurance policy should be. You never get anything done. But here, when you have a fairly small board that's closely held, they all agree on the issue of health insurance. And their conclusion is that 4 forms of birth control, including the morning after pill, are sinful. They don't object to all birth control. They don't object to the birth control pill, but they object to things that they say operate after fertilization occurs, such as the morning after pill. So Hobby Lobby objected to the ACA, which required them to provide their employees with this treatment. And this challenge went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, one of my favorite pastimes about the Supreme Court is looking at the signs that people hold outside. This one always gets a chuckle. If men could get pregnant, birth control would be from gumball machines and be bacon flavored. And if you see in the back, it says, "My mom's not ready to be grandma yet." Okay. One of the as an aside, the Congressional Budget Office's report yesterday noted that if funding for Planned Parenthood was cut, there would be several 100,000 more people born every year. And a lot of conservatives saying, "What's the bad part about that?" Right? I'll move on. Sign: "This is not a church. This is a craft store." This woman, if you can't tell, is dressed up like a pack of birth control pills. "Hey, Supreme Court, no bosses in my bedroom," with the silhouette of a man in a suit in your bedroom. I think Hobby Lobby would probably agree with this. They don't want to be in your bedroom, and they don't want to have to fund your lifestyle. But the sign, I think, missed the mark a little bit. "Contraception is my business. Corporations are not people." This one's my favorite. Anyone here can figure out what she's holding in her hand? Yeah, SJ said it. A knitted crochet uterus. There was actually a project of crocheting uteri, and mailing them to Hobby Lobby headquarters saying, "Mess with this one, not mine." I suspect that she bought the thread at Joann's and not at Hobby Lobby. "Keep your hobbies off my ovaries. I'm with her." Okay. Unfortunately, the pro-life signage is never quite as engaging. "I am pro-life, team pro-life." Come on, get a little more creativity. These guys were hardcore though. They were wearing kilts in the snow. "God's law comes first. Repeal socialist Obamacare." Anyway, the arguments at the Supreme Court stunningly went well for Hobby Lobby. And after the case was argued, we had an opinion by Justice Alito. A 5-4 decision which held that the mere fact that Hobby Lobby is a corporation does not deprive it of religious liberty. Right? Lots of corporations have religious liberty. Churches, Lakewood, right there, right? Where we are, there. It's a massive corporation, and it's religious, right? So the mere fact that you are a religious organization does not deprive you of it to take the corporate form. But more importantly, Justice Alito's opinion held that requiring these groups to buy products they deem sinful is a burden on their religious exercise. The mere fact that Barbara and David Green are not forced to take birth control, right? That's not what's going on here. But making them pay for it is itself a sin. The dissent by Justice Ginsburg, who likes to call herself now the notorious RBG. By the way, the 20th anniversary of Biggie's death, rest in peace, Biggie. I almost said rest in Pac, Freudian slip. But Justice Ginsburg made the point that forcing women to buy this healthcare on their own and not be giving it to their employer is violating their own interests. Okay. In any event, in a rare case, the pro-life groups won. They don't win much in the Supreme Court, but they were ultimately victorious. The second challenge to the Affordable Care Act in the Supreme Court is far less interesting, but involves a fairly easy statutory interpretation question. The Affordable Care Act allows states to create exchanges where you can buy health insurance. To the surprise of no one, Texas has not done it. Texas is like, we don't want anything to do with this law. Okay. So when Texas failed to establish its own exchange, what happened? The feds have a federal exchange in the backdrop. This is a healthcare.gov, that website that never actually worked. But there's a provision of the law that says subsidies, right? Subsidies that make a policy affordable are available on an exchange established by the state. Says it right there. Subsidies are available on an exchange established by the state. I think that means in a federal exchange, there are no subsidies. Many of you are not attorneys, but this is not hard to figure out. Unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act was such that if subsidies are if subsidies are not available, insurance would become very, very expensive. Why? Obamacare jacks up the rate of your insurance. So the Obama administration issued a rule saying, it says subsidies are available on an exchange established by the state. We will treat it as if subsidies are available on all exchanges, federal and state, basically ignoring what was the plain text of the statute. This was challenged in court, and it went to the Supreme Court. It divided the courts of appeals, and once again, would make a decision to break my heart. He does it every June without fail. We see, oh, there he is, right? Anyway, going on to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, even though the plain text of the statute seems to limit the subsidies to the state-run exchanges, doing that would make the law not work. And the purpose of the health insurance law, the Chief Justice held, is to improve health insurance and not to destroy it. And because ruling for the challengers would destroy it, that cannot be the outcome. Justice Scalia delivered what would be his last dissent from the bench in that case. This was not too long before he passed away. And Justice Scalia joked that the Supreme Court has now twice saved the Affordable Care Act, and the law should be called not Obamacare, but SCOTUS Care, Supreme Court of the United States. And Justice Scalia said that it seems a different set of rules seem to apply whenever we come to discussing the Affordable Care Act. The third Supreme Court case, I promise you'll get back to them, involved the nuns, the little sisters of the poor. This is an order of nuns. They're around the world, and their vocation is to help the elderly, help the sick, and give them a dignified life later in life. They help Catholics, non-Catholics alike. I was actually very fortunate after the case was argued at the Supreme Court. I had lunch with a bunch of the little sisters who were involved in this case. They're pretty interesting people. They're very smart. They didn't want this case. You often look at these people at the Supreme Court and think, wow, you know, they're so committed. You know, the nuns don't want to do this. They have better things to do with their lives. They want to help people, right? They want to give charity, pray. The last thing they want to do is have to waste their time going to court. But this challenge was really brought to them because the Obama administration refused to give them exemption from the mandate. The government said to them, okay, we won't make you pay for birth control, but sign this piece of paper, and that will amend your insurance contract, And that way we can deliver birth control to your employees on the exact same plan. The nuns said, wait a minute. We're not signing a thing. If this is so important, right, why can't the government just do it by itself? Why do you need to involve us? Give these people a separate plan. The same way you have a dental card or a prescription drug card, give them a separate card which they can use for birth control. The government replied, no, we can't do that because that would create a burden for female employees. Female employees may not want to do that. They may be disencouraged from using birth control, and they won't do it. So this case went to the Supreme Court. I was actually sitting in the front row. I was right there, 5 feet from them. And the justices seemed very divided on how to resolve this case. Virtually every lower court opinion ruled against the nuns. All the lower courts ruled against the nuns. The nuns left the court. It was quite a scene. I think they busted all the Catholic school boys and girls, and they filled the sidewalk. There were hundreds of kids screaming and cheering when the nuns walked down. It's a scene you'd never even think of at the Supreme Court. But this is Sister Lorraine, and she was giving a pretty cheerful speech. But then it came to the Supreme Court. What were they going to do, right? Would Chief Justice Roberts break my heart again? Not quite. A little bit, but not quite. What the court basically said was, we're going to punt on this. There were only 8 justices at this point. Justice Scalia had passed away a few months ago. And it seemed fairly obvious that they could not reach a judgment one way or the other. So at first they said, hey, little sisters, hey, Obama administration, can you guys give this some more thought, right? Maybe think of a different way of accommodating the nuns. And they wrote back saying, yeah, no, not really, right? The nuns wanted it to be exempted. The governments didn't, so they couldn't resolve it. How did the Supreme Court treat that? They pretended the divide didn't exist. And they said, okay, go back to the lower courts and figure it out again. In other words, bother us again when you have 8, so when we have 9 justices. The crazy thing is, which probably no one anticipated at the time, was that Donald Trump won the election. I assumed that Hillary would win and that we'd have to keep fighting against this. So now, when you have a Republican in office, they can actually give an exemption for little sisters. Hasn't happened yet. I'm getting a little bit nervous about this. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but eventually, I think part of the Obamacare Repeal Phase 2 will be giving relief to the little sisters. But for now, the nuns are serving. What comes next, which is probably what you thought I'd be talking about, right? On Monday, last week, the House released a new bill. The old bill was the Affordable Care Act, ACA. The new bill is the American Health Care Act, the AHCA, which is going to drive people crazy. ACA, AHCA. Why? I don't know. The thing of 3 other letters you can use. The first thing to note about this new healthcare law is that it's not a repeal of Obamacare. It isn't. Not even close. The House voted on an Obamacare repeal bill last year, which repealed the entire damn thing. Not all of it, but like most of it, right? What this new law does is not repeal the law, but for example, the ACA gives subsidies based on your income. The new law gives tax credits, same thing, based on your age. The old law mandates that you buy insurance. The new law says if you don't buy insurance and try to re-enter the market, you'll hit with a penalty. So the basics of the law are not that much different from Obamacare. But I think that the most significant aspect of what Paul Ryan's trying to do, and I don't think people fully appreciate this, is to reform entitlements. If you saw the Congressional Budget Office report from yesterday, the top headline everyone saw was 24 million people lose insurance. I'll get back to that number in a minute. But the subheadline is it reduces the deficit by about $3 trillion because it basically cuts back on Medicaid significantly. I think what Ryan is actually attempting to do here is not just repeal Obamacare, but make the United States government solvent in the long term. I don't know, though, if this will have enough votes to pass either in the House or the Senate. And the reason why is for the top line that says 24 million people will lose insurance. Now, this number is very hard to credit. Now, let me explain why. The letter, the government report assumes that if the individual mandate disappears, 14 million people will suddenly drop out of the marketplace. But the fact of the matter is the individual mandate was not effective at keeping people in the marketplace. So many people were able to gain exemptions and waivers that this was not very effective. How did it even work? If you went uninsured, you get hit with about an $800 or $900 penalty a year. For most people, that's far less than the cost of insurance. Even if the mandate's repealed, I don't think that many people will suddenly decide, you know what, I don't need insurance anymore. There was always this magic quality to the mandate that would make people buy something, and it frankly didn't. So to give you a really easy example, the CBO report assumed that if that the mandate's repealed, 5 million people would drop out of Medicaid. Medicaid's free. Like, it costs little to nothing. The notion that repealing the mandate would make people disenroll from Medicaid simply doesn't hold water. So once you get past the top line and you recognize that, yes, probably people will lose coverage, in the long term, what you actually see is prices start to stabilize as more younger people find insurance a worthwhile investment. As it stands now, it's not a worthwhile investment for most young people. But the far more pressing issue is a number of Republicans who've been freaked out by the top line number said, we're not going to back this. And even someone like Tom Cotton, who lived in Houston some years ago as a law clerk, has said, this is hocus pocus. This will never get the votes in the House or Senate. You're wasting your time. Start over. So I am not particularly optimistic about this reform effort. Maybe Donald Trump can whip everyone in line and get everyone to vote. I mean, this would be the biggest close, the art of the deal, right? The biggest close ever. If he can get this passed in the House, it may not actually improve health insurance, but it may do other things in terms of entitlement reform that could not be done otherwise, and will give states far more flexibility in managing their Medicaid budgets, which are skyrocketing out of control. But I'll close with a general note, which I discussed in the book, is the reason why we're still talking about this nearly 7 years later is because of the manner in which it was enacted. There was such opposition to this law that even 7, 8 years later, people still feel betrayed by the ACA, that they had no role in enacting it. And I don't think that this betrayal will be going anywhere anytime soon. Indeed, the first book I wrote was called Unprecedented, The Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. The second book was called Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty and Executive Power. And the third book we called Undone. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I think we'll have a few minutes for questions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Question, Your Honor.
All right, it's my understanding, all of which comes from television and newspapers.
Good space, yeah.
That what we're looking at now want to be transitional, that what comes in the rest of that it has to be done this way because you have to use reconciliation and you can't get the votes for getting the positive parts of the plan, which would be selling insurance across state lines, establishing co-ops, doing all of these things that are designed to bring a lot more people into the marketplace and to cut costs dramatically. And the last thing is, it's also my understanding, is what's wrong with my understanding, but the rest of it is that in this first part, the reason for these subsidies is to transition two things: transition people who have health care into something without presenting a dramatic jolt to the marketplace and destroying the whole thing. And also as you're transitioning them, you want to equal out the people who are getting their insurance or their employer, which is highly subsidized, although you don't maybe think about it that way, and the people who are not, who are on their own. So tell me what's wrong with that understanding of where we're going, because I gotta say, it does not look bad to me. It looks complex, difficult, requiring adjustments here and there. But to take something that is this massive, all-encompassing, put everything into unelected bureaucrats writing their own 3,000 or so regulations, maybe a great many more than that, coding it all, putting it on giant computers, coordinating it all, and now we're going to destroy it cold turkey.
Why do I feel like I'm at
transition?
Why do I feel like I'm at oral argument with that kind of question? Thank you, Justice. Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. So Paul Ryan and Trump and others have described this as a 3-phase process. Let me walk you through this. The judge mentioned most of these. Phase 1, budget reconciliation. With only 51 votes in the Senate, they can make massive changes to the law that affect the budget. They can't do everything. For example, they can't repeal various aspects of Obamacare, which tell insurers what kind of benefits they have to provide. They probably could, but it'll get very bloody. They have to overrule the Senate parliamentarian, and I don't think they have a backbone for that, even though they totally could. Phase 2 is executive action. Yes, using the regulatory state to modify the ACA and put in a number of transitional devices to make things more stabilized. Here, HHS Secretary Price probably does have a lot of discretion. He'll probably do things that I think are illegal, in light of what Sebelius did over the years. Then we get to stage 3, magic. This is where the magic happens, right? This is where changes are made that require 60 votes in the Senate, and this is where you can actually change the ACA to make health insurance affordable. Tom Cotton, who's, again, no liberal, was giving an interview, I think this morning or yesterday, where he was asked about phase 3. And he said point blank, I agree with him, you need 60 votes for this. There will not be 60 Republicans in the Senate. You'll need 8 or maybe 9 Democrats to go along with it. They're not going to. So unless you actually can get 8 or 9 Democrats to go along with this plan, phase 1 and 2 will lead to a brick wall. I don't know, maybe Donald Trump could twist enough arms and make things happy and give them highway road projects, God knows what, right? But unless you can actually count to 60, and I can't count that high, I count 51. I don't even know if we have all 50. You may lose a couple Republicans on this bill for purity reasons. It becomes very tough. So the answer to your question is, unless you get to 60, phases 1 and 2 don't go very far. I think there's a question over there somewhere. Okay, yeah, in the back.
Have you ever calculated what is the subsidy that the 85% of Americans get who either get their health insurance through employers or through Medicare? The employer could go ahead and pay tax on that income, basically receiving in the form of free health care, and the elderly and over 65 in terms of the subsidy they receive from the government for low-cost health care insurance. How does that compare to the $2,000 to $4,000 subsidy that they're offering for low-income people to get health care insurance?
All right, so I think both of the first 2 questions alluded to a similar point. The government gives every American a subsidy for health insurance by not taxing that benefit. Since World War II, health insurance has not been taxed. And so if you're getting, for your family, $20,000 or $30,000 a year for health insurance from your employer, South Texas gives very generous health insurance, that's not taxed. That's basically an added benefit. So one of the purposes of the subsidies or the tax credits is to give the similar benefit to self-insured people, right? Similar benefit. I've never calculated the exact amount, but what I think is safe to say is that to the extent Republicans want to deal with this problem, they would eliminate that subsidy for everyone. This is not popular, but if we actually got rid of the tax exemption, that we tax all of our employer benefits, you guys would hate it, but it would untangle, if I may, unravel insurance from your employer. Insurance should not be connected to your employer in any way. It's a very bad idea. You're not frugal when you buy from your employer. You don't try and shop around. You take whatever they give you. We would all be so much better off if we purchased our own policies, not for our employer. But so long as that tax exemption exists, it's unlikely. Impeachment? I mean, oh, he didn't quite get impeached. But I mean, sure. So a lot of this is Richard Nixon's fault. Richard Nixon actually tried to nationalize healthcare, and that ran into a brick wall because he had to resign. But had Nixon served his full term, he probably would have nationalized healthcare. I mean, he created the EPA, did a lot of other things Republicans can't think of. He hated guns. I mean, I'm not quite sure. Tough on crime, I suppose, but not much conservatism there. The second question involving pre-existing conditions is a question I often receive. The new bill deals with it by saying that if you decide to go uninsured and want to come back to the marketplace, you have to pay a 30% premium for 1 year. So there is a penalty for going uninsured. Unclear if it's enough to stabilize the marketplace. Is that we out of time or? One more question. Okay, right there. Short question.
What happens if Congress is deadlocked and doesn't do anything? Trump has threatened to just let it fall.
Yeah.
And that gives him an excuse to play.
Yeah, isn't that a good question? The question is, what happens if Congress can't pass a bill and Trump just sits there and twiddles his thumbs, right? Starts tweeting about how watch it implode. It's going to implode. Even before Barack Obama left office, the law was falling apart. In a number of counties, there was only one insurance option left. In certain counties, there were no insurance options left. One insurer after another was fleeing the market. I was often asked over the summer, did the Democrats design this law to fail, right, so they can get single payer? And my answer was, not this quickly. They thought it maybe last a decade or so, but it came apart off the wheels very, very fast. So the short answer is, if Republicans pass nothing, then it's a very strange burden for the Democrats because it's going to fall apart. They'll try and blame Trump. It's like, you didn't pass my bill. This is all you. This is Obama. So wait and see. Thank you all so much for your attention. Go buy my book, and I hope you enjoy the show.